Welcome back to the Profitable Productivity Podcast. I'm your host, Trisetta Washington, and this is the space where we dive into practical strategies that help you as a nonprofit leader to lead with clarity, confidence, and care. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the sneakiest sources of team friction, and that's unclear communication. Now, you might think that you're being clear, but if your team is still confused, behind, or second guessing, something is getting lost in translation, right? Here's the real truth: most communication problems aren't about what's said, they're about what's being assumed. So, in this episode, we're going to explore some of those hidden gaps that tend to trip leaders up and a simple shift that you can make in order for you to be able to communicate more clearly, even when things are moving really fast, right? So, if this topic resonates with you, then go ahead, do me a favor, send it to the first fellow nonprofit leader who comes to mind for you. And don't forget to check the show notes for tools and updates from our community. Now, I always like to begin my podcast with a quick win. So, this week's tip is the next time you assign a task to a team member, don't just say what you need. I want you to explain why it matters. When people understand the why behind the task, they're much more likely to take that ownership of the how, right? All right. So, one of the things that I think really trips us up as leaders is we kind of get stuck in this trap of assuming, right? This assumption trap, if you will. And what happens is we often believe that we're communicating clearly when we're actually just being consistent, not necessarily concise or explicit with what we're communicating. And this creates this dangerous assumption that everyone gets it. So what is the assumption trap, right? It's essentially the belief that because you said something before, because you said this before, or even said it often, that it's been understood. Repetition does not actually equate to clarity. Those are two different things. Consistency in your messaging is going to help, but clarity really comes from confirming that there's that shared understanding between you and your team members, right? So just because no one asked a question doesn't mean that they understood what the assignment was, right? And by making these assumptions, we start to create this invisible friction, right? And this manifests by work starting to slow down because they're having to redo it, or there's confusion or misaligned priorities. You may even experience your team members being hesitant to speak up, especially in the mission driven organizations where people really want to get it right without needing much help from others, right? And maybe it manifests by you feeling like you keep repeating yourself. You feel like a broken record, yet those that you lead are still missing the mark with what you're asking. And that begins to erode trust because people are starting to second guess themselves, or maybe even each other, or even you. And so there's here's a few just common examples of how we may be communicating based off of assumption. So it begins with vague directions, just being very vague in what our instructions are to begin with. You might say something like, "Hey, can you get this to me soon? Can you get this to me quickly?" Well, what does soon mean? What does quickly mean? Does it mean an hour? Does that mean today? Does this week? What does that mean? We got to be more specific, more explicit in our directions. Another one is expecting common sense. One thing that I learned years ago is that common sense isn't necessarily common. You may think that it's obvious, and your team member may think that they're doing what you ask them to do. But here's the thing, what's standard for you may be completely new to someone else. So don't just expect that, oh, it's common sense. They should already know that. And also silence. Oftentimes we feel like, oh, because nobody had any questions, that means that they understood what I said, right? No questions does not mean that there's clarity. It could mean that there's confusion. It could mean that there's fear. It could mean that they're just tired and fatigued. This is especially common in organizations where that are very hierarchical in nature, or when there's like those power dynamics at play. People will just kind of clam up, right? Clear communication is not about saying more, right? It's about making sure that what you're saying actually lands. And there's three common communication gaps that or traps that I see leaders fall into, right? And these are going to quietly sabotage your team's clarity, their performance, and trust. And these aren't just quirks, right? These are costly patterns that are going to lead to confusion. It's going to lead to disengagement and just delay in getting things done, right? So the first one is those vague expectations, right? That I just mentioned a moment ago. So what does that look like? You think that you've given clear instructions, but your team is still not really sure about what it is that you're asking for. That gap between what you meant and what they heard, that's going to cause delays. That's going to cause having to redo work because there just isn't that true understanding. Some additional examples of this are, hey, circle back with me later. Again, when exactly? How do you want me to circle back? Or I need that cleaned up. Cleaned up how? Is it the formatting? Is it the grammar? Is it the tone? What exactly is it that you need cleaned up? So the fix here is to provide clarity and some criteria around what done looks like, right? So you want to give a definition of done. Be explicit here about what the deadline is, what the time frame or time frame. You want to also share what the format should be. Are you expecting this in an email, in a report, a slide deck? What is the format that you need the task completed in? And what is the purpose or outcome? Like why is it that you need this? This is going to be presented to the board, right? When your employees know the why, then the what makes sense to them, right? And then, like I said earlier, they can start to take ownership of the how it gets completed. The second trap is being reactive with your communication. And this looks like you mainly communicating with your team members when there is something wrong or when there's something that you need urgently, right? Your team is only hearing from you through just kind of last minute updates or even crisis driven instructions, right? You're in that heat of the moment. You're like, I need this right away. And that's just going to create stress and unpredictability. And that feels a lot like putting out fires instead of leading, right? The last job that I had before stepping into full-time entrepreneurship, my supervisor and I had very different styles of leading. She was very much that firefighter always putting out fires, whereas I'm more like Smokey the Bear. You too can prevent forest fires, right? Like, let's prevent the fire. Yeah, we got to put it out, but how do we prevent it from happening again? How do we prevent this from becoming a continual issue, right? So how do we fix that? Well, you can do that by being proactive with your communication and building some consistency into the how and when you share your updates. Maybe you do weekly briefings or kickoff meetings. You could even do end of the day or end of the week wrap ups. Maybe have a touch point on Mondays where everyone is clear. You get clarity around, provide clarity around what the priorities are. Or at the end of the week, what let the Friday, let's reflect on how the week went. What can we do differently? Right. So you want to start to normalize communication when things are calm, when things are going well, so that it doesn't always signal to your team members that there's a problem. Because if you're only communicating when there's an issue, then you're creating anxiety in them, undue anxiety in them when you get ready to go communicate with them. Right. So communication should not just happen when something is broken. Right. You need to have a pattern. And then the third trap that leaders fall into is having a lack of a feedback loop. Right. So you deliver information to your team members and you assume that they received it accurately, right? You ask anybody have any questions and crickets, right? Everyone's silent. No one says anything. Your team members may nod along, nod at you. Yes, we got it. But really, they're not aligned. So how do you fix that? You can fix this by asking your team members to reflect back to you what they heard, right? So you can say, "Hey, what's your first step after this?" Or how are you planning to approach this task? You can create a norm where summarizing what the next steps are is just a part of your culture. If you do this long enough, do this on a consistent basis long enough, then you will essentially be training your team members to do that automatically, and you may not even have to ask in the going forward, right? A little bonus here, you can use some shared tools or follow-up notes to help reinforce any key points that you might be needing to make, right? So, but when you skip this process, when you skip the follow-up, you're going to risk leaving your team members confused, even if they don't speak up. And so I want to introduce to you a framework called the CLEAR framework, and it's an acronym. And we'll get into what the acronym means here in just a moment. But when communication feels rushed or scattered or even unclear, it's usually because one or more key elements are missing, right? And the CLEAR framework really gives you this simple structure that you can use for any type of communication, whether it's a quick email, a team meeting, a project kickoff, or even, mid hallway conversation where you're delegating a task. You can use this framework anywhere, anytime. So let's break it down. So the C stands for context. This is where you're sharing why the task matters. So you start with the why behind the request or the message. If it's going to help your team members to connect the dots between the specific task and the bigger picture at large. Okay? And it prevents this kind of like, this came out of nowhere type of reaction. For example, you could say, we received feedback from the grant reviewer that our narrative was unclear in places. We want to strengthen it before we resubmit. Right? Now, the L. The L stands for logistics. This is the what, right? What needs to be done and by when. So you want to be specific and direct and include here what is exactly that you need, what format or platform needs to be utilized, and what is the deadline or timeline for this to be completed. Example, please review and edit the draft of this grant by Thursday at 3 p.m. and save it to the shared Google Drive folder, right? So there's an example, right? We've gotten really clear on the what, the platform, and the when, right? Like when do we need this by? The E stands for expectations. And this is really defining what good looks like to you, right? So this is where you're going to describe what the quality standards, tone, format, or key outcomes are going to be, right? This is going to help to prevent that I didn't know you wanted it like that moments from happening, right? So here's another example for you. You can say, make sure that the edits align with our storytelling framework and keep the tone people centered and clear for funders who are unfamiliar with our work, right? So, this is going to really help you to uh, define what the expectations are for the tasks that you're delegating. A stands for accountability. This is the who of the what, right? So who's doing what? You want to assign clear roles or action steps, right? This is going to help to avoid, oh, I thought that so and so was doing that. Or, well, I thought you were doing that. That cuts out all of that confusion. So you could say, hey, Jasmine, you're going to take the lead on the edits. And Marcus, can you review the edits for clarity by end of day on Thursday, right? And finally, the R stands for recap. This is where you're going to confirm what those next steps are. You want to summarize any actions that need to take place to ensure that there is alignment between all parties, right? And you can even ask someone to reflect back or repeat what the plan is to help ensure that there is that consistency or that clarity there, right? So an example of this is, okay, so to recap, Jasmine will make the edits by 3 p.m. on Thursday, and Marcus will review for clarity by the end of the day. The final version will be in the drive by Friday morning, right? So here's a real world example kind of tying all of this together, right? What I just going through the clear format, right? Since the funder is asking for more clarity around impact, we're giving context. I need you to revise the report to include updated participant outcomes and anecdotes. This is logistics, right? By Tuesday at 5 p.m. Now be sure that the format matches our quarterly template and the tone stays mission driven. There goes our expectations. Then Kim, your lead on this. Ryan, can you proof it once Kim's done? There's our accountability. And then finally, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll check the draft Tuesday evening before submission, right? And so that's kind of our recap. So when your message is clear, using our acronym, your team is going to be able to move forward with confidence, and that's going to cut out all of the confusion, right? So clarity isn't about repeating yourself. It's about slowing down enough to make sure that what you're saying is actually landing. And listen, if you're struggling with this, you're not failing as a leader because communication is hard, right? Communication is hard because we're just moving fast and having to juggle a lot. So slow down just a little bit, take a pause, because true leadership communication is intentional. I'm going to say that again. True leadership communication is intentional. So here's an action step for you to apply what we've talked about today. Because I'm always giving assignments or homework, if you will, because I don't want to just talk about these things and you don't actually take action on. The whole reason for me even having this podcast is to be able to share advice and tips and techniques that you can take into your leadership, put into your leadership toolbox and utilize when the situations align. Right. So here's your assignment. I want you to pick just one team interaction for this week, right? Do a check-in, an email, a project kickoff, whatever it is, and use the clear framework. And I want you to watch what shifts with your team. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It just needs to be clearer than usual. Even minor adjustments can have a major impact. So don't get caught up in trying to make it perfect, right? We just want to have better, right? Like we just want to be better this time than we were the last time, right? So, and also, if this is an area where you're really challenged in your leadership and communication gaps are really costing you your time, your energy, and trust, then let's fix them together. I definitely want to invite you to step into the next level of support. So, book a free consultation with me so we can explore how you can strengthen your team communication and trust, right? And, you can do that at chatwithtresetta.com. It'll also be in the show notes, so you can go there and just click the link, or you can navigate directly by putting in chatwithtresetta.com, right? So listen, you do not need to be louder. You just need to be clearer. And when you are, your team is going to follow with more ease and more trust and more momentum. That means their performance is going to increase. Well, that's all I have for you today. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Profitable Productivity Podcast. I hope that you found this episode helpful. And until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion.